Hey everyone, it's Megan here from Megan Makes 2, and today I'm going to show you how to crochet the thermal stitch. This stitch is a thick, sturdy stitch, and it is also reversible, so it looks the same on both sides. The thermal stitch is made by using single crochets in a unique way to almost double up the thickness of your stitch. For today's tutorial, we're going to be using Brava Worsted weight in the color Fig from We Crochet, as well as a Clover Amour size F 3.75mm crochet hook. Now I like to use the Clover Amour hooks, especially when working with such a thick stitch. Let's go ahead and get started. So to start, we're going to go ahead and make a slip knot with our yarn. And then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to chain 11 stitches. So we'll actually be working with 10 stitches in our little swatch. The 11th stitch will be our first chain one for our first row. Okay, and then you'll see here that in our chains we have two sides. This little V here, we have a back loop and a front loop. For this first row, we're going to be working just in the back loop of each chain stitch, and we skip the first one, and we're going to go ahead and work into the second one from the hook, and we're just going to work a regular single crochet into each back loop of the chains all the way across. And this will be our initial row to start our swatch of thermal stitch. Okay, so I'm working the last stitch here, and that completes our first row. So now we're going to chain one and turn, and here's where we start doing the special technique that makes it the thermal stitch. So we're going to be working through the back loop only of the row that we just made, as well as the unworked front loop from our chains. Okay, so insert your hook into the back loop of the first stitch from the row below, and into the front loop that was unworked of the chains, and then just work a regular single crochet stitch. And we're going to do that all the way across. So into the back loop and the unworked front loop 2 rows below, and then work a single crochet. And what this does is it doubles up the thickness of your fabric that you're creating with your crochet. So it creates a very sturdy stitch. So again, we're always going to be working through the back loop only of the row that we just created, as well as the unworked front loop from the row 2 rows down. And we'll do this all the way across for row 2. Okay, and then we'll work this last stitch, which sometimes can be hard to get into. It's hard to see that last back loop, and go ahead and finish off our 10th stitch there. So that's what we'll have at the end of row 2, and you'll see that when we turn, you can see the unworked front loops, and then we're going to again be working through those as well as the back loop of the row we just made. So we're going through the back loop of row 2 as well as the unworked front loops from row 1. And do that in each stitch across, and you're just working a regular single crochet, but the reason why it gets thick like that is because of where we're placing our hook. So this stitch does take a little bit of time, a little bit longer than just regular single crochet because of the technique that we're using, but it does create a very nice sturdy fabric. And here we are, the last stitch, and again you can see we almost create like a little ledge here, of the row that we just worked will be right behind the front loops that weren't worked. So this is what it looks like on the other side. And it's going to look the same on both sides, but you can tell what row you're working on based on that ledge that you see here. Okay, so let's go ahead and work another row of thermal stitch. We'll chain 1, and again, go through the back loop only of the last row you worked and the unworked front loop 2 rows below, and then work a regular single crochet and do that all the way across. Okay, and now we'll be working that last stitch, which again, that back loop can sometimes get hidden in the stitches, so make sure you don't miss it. And then chain 1, turn your work, and on this side you can see more of what the pattern's going to start looking like. So I'm going to go ahead and work a few more rows of our thermal stitch so you can see what a swatch will look like and how the stitch will look once you are done. Okay, so here I've done a few more rows so you can start to see what the thermal stitch will look like. And again, it's going to look the same on the front and the back. And it's a very sturdy stitch. It's great for making baskets, hot pads, bags. It will give your piece a lot of structure. And when you look here, you can kind of tell, it's a little bit tricky to count your rows, but you'll start down here. You see these, and then you see these like running stitches almost that go across. So each set of those is 2 rows. So that's how I like to count going all the way up. And then this last set is actually only 1 because we haven't completed the one behind. So it can be helpful to use stitch markers at the ends of your rows just so that you can keep track, or use some kind of like row counter. So what I'm going to show you now is how we would end. Normally we go through the back loop only, but when you're done with your piece, your last row, you're going to work through both loops of the row below as well as the unworked front loop from 2 rows below, and then go ahead and work your single crochet. So again, you're going to go through both loops and then through the unworked front loop and work a single crochet, and this is how you end your project. That way you won't end up with that weird ledge of a row that you normally would when you're working the stitch initially. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this row so you can see what it will look like when you are all finished. Okay, so we're working our last finishing stitch here. I'm just going to pull my hook out real quick, and you can see that we have a nice smooth finish on the top of our piece. It looks the same on both sides. You don't have that weird ledge that we normally have, and that's how you would finish off your thermal stitch on whatever project you are currently working on. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple more things about the thermal stitch as far as increasing and how to decrease as well. Okay, so I'd like to show you how to increase on the thermal stitch. So what we're going to do is it's going to be worked over 2 different rows. So for our first row, we're going to chain 1, and we're going to be increasing on both ends. So I'm going to work my first stitch again through the back loop and the unworked front loop, work a single crochet, and then to increase, I'm just going to do that again into the same 2 stitches, work my single crochet, and then until I get to the last stitch, I'm just going to work normally, how I would normally work my thermal stitch. So going through the back loop and the unworked front loop 2 rows below, all the way until our very last stitch, which again is the one that can kind of hide on us. So here we are at the last stitch, going through the back loop and the unworked front loop. I worked 1, and then I'm going to work a second single crochet into those same 2 loops. So I've made my increase, but what that's going to do is it's going to make the next row I do a little bit different. So let me show you. Again, we're going to chain 1 like normal, and then work our first stitch into the back loop and the unworked front loop 2 rows below, and then we're going to again make a regular single crochet. And now here we've got our second one that we worked, but we don't have a coordinating front loop that was unworked. So we're going to go into the same front loop that we did our first stitch. It's kind of just like increasing on the first row, and work our second single crochet. So now our loops are lined up again for the rest of our stitches until we get to the last 2, because again we increased on both ends of our row. So we're just going to work like normal all the way across. And then when we got to the last 2 stitches, again, we're only going to have 1 of the unworked front loops to work into. So we're going to work into that same unworked front loop twice. So 1 for our first stitch and 1 for our second stitch. So you're going to 2 separate back loops, but the same unworked front loop. And then go ahead and single crochet to finish off. So now you can see that we've increased on both sides. We now have 12 stitches in our row, and when we turn to work our next row, we will end up having lined up back loop and front loop together, and you'll have an even number for that next row. So your increases are going to be worked over 2 rows. 2 rows will be a little bit different when you're doing this. And then again, we'll just keep working, same as always, our regular thermal stitch all the way across. Okay, so now I want to show you how to decrease using thermal stitch. So again, we're going to start our row with the chain 1, and this time we're going to be decreasing on either end of our swatch. So I'm going to insert my hook like I normally would through the back loop and the front unworked front loop, draw up a loop, then I'm going to insert my hook into the next set of back loop and front loop stitches, draw up a loop, then I'm going to yarn over and draw through all 3 loops on my hook. So I've decreased by 1 stitch. Then I'm going to work my next stitches as normal. So my next 6 stitches will be as normal, and I'm going to stop when I have 2 stitches left, since we're going to be decreasing on either side. Okay, so here are my last 2 stitches, and I'm going to do the same thing. So insert your hook in the back loop and the unworked front loop, yarn over and draw up a loop on your hook, insert your hook into the next back loop and front loop set, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over, and draw through 3. So now we've decreased by 1 on either side. Now this second row after our decrease is going to be a little different. So we're chain 1, insert our hook into the back loop and the first unworked front loop. We're going to end up with 2 front loops for this first stitch. So we're just going to work through that first one that's along the edge, and then you'll see that we have that extra one there. We're just going to skip it. We're not going to work into that one at all. We're going to go into our next back loop and the coordinating front loop that would go with that stitch, and then work our single crochet. And then we're going to continue to work across until we get to our last stitch. Okay, so here's our last stitch, and you can see we have 2 unworked front loops. We're gonna skip the first one and go into the one that's closest to the edge. That's gonna give us nice clean edges. We're not gonna have extra loops hanging off. We work our single crochet, and you can see that we've decreased on either end, and even though we've skipped that unworked front loop, it won't be noticeable in your piece. So our next row we can work as normal by chaining 1, inserting our hook into the back loop and front loop that coordinate together, and working our single crochet and working our thermal stitch all the way across. Okay, so here you can see this is what it will look like when you're doing decreases in thermal stitch. You can see that we've evenly decreased on either side. It looks the same on both sides, just as our normal thermal stitch would look. So that's how you work a decrease using the thermal stitch. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to thermal stitch in crochet. If you'd like to try out this stitch, you can now check out my Jordynne Tote. It's free on megamakesdo.com. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button and make sure you subscribe.